Welcome to the Wing Space podcast, a place to take up space, a space for you to settle in, sit back, relax, and focus a little bit on health, wellness, faith, family, and this crazy thing called life.
This podcast is not a replacement for mental health treatment or professional health care. In case of crisis or emergency, please contact your local healthcare provider or dial 911.
Hey there, and welcome to the Wing Space podcast, a place to take up space. Joining me today on the podcast is our nutritionist, Tracy Pritchard. Tracy, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks. Great to be back.
And we're going to, shift it up a little bit today. Instead of focusing fully on nutrition, we are going to tackle this topic of falling back. So if you have not looked ahead in your calendars yet, here's the fair warning that November 3rd, you will get an extra hour of sleep because it is officially Daylight Savings Sunday. So that means when you go to bed on Saturday night, you can expect to get an extra hour of sleep. And before we started recording today's podcast, Tracy and I were talking about, how when you have little kids, there's this interesting adjustment that comes after especially when we spring forward and we lose an hour and the whole week seems to be kind of off. And some much more negative consequences and side effects as a result of losing that hour of sleep and getting our kiddos back on schedules and stuff. But when we're looking at the fall and we're falling back, so we're gaining an hour of sleep, certainly, free sleep is great and we'll take it whenever we can get it. But there's definitely some effects that we need to be aware of for ourselves as adults, for our teenagers, for our children, and it's important for us to think about that. So, Tracy, I'm just going to let you kind of jump in so we can start talking about some of these health effects of the time change.
Sure. Well, first, I know it's not just nutrition, but of course that's the first thing I like to talk about, but they're all related, right? We always talk about food, movement, sleep, stress. You can't really talk about one without the other, but from a nutrition perspective, that falling back can still have an influence on your appetite. So if you or your kids, you have school or work and lunch is still at that same time every day, it's really likely that you're going to feel a little hungry sooner because, yesterday it would be that you ate at noon and today it's really 1:00 when you're eating at noon. So just be aware of that. That's not uncommon. You may want to eat a bigger breakfast knowing that's going to happen or plan for a snack that day so that you're not overeating once it is time to have your lunch. Because if you wait and you eat too late, you might wind up overeating. Again, just awareness of that. We can't necessarily change our lunchtime or our breaks at work or at school, but that's a real thing. Give yourself a little grace. If you find that you do overeat a little for a day or two and don't think, oh no, here comes the winter pounds, or, now I'm hibernating and I'm just going to, wear sweaters all winter long. It doesn't matter. That's okay. Like our hunger mechanisms are intimately related to that sleep cycle. So that's going to happen.
That's such an interesting thing in terms of adjusting when you eat. I hadn't thought of that before, but I'm sure if I really paid attention to it this year, I am going to get hungry at a different time, and certainly it sets us up for overeating. And you mentioned the idea of hibernating or packing on those winter pounds, and that kind of for me leads me into kind of how the mood and the mentality shift starts to happen as we get into winter. We know that seasonal affective disorder is a real thing, and we know that when the days are shorter and the sun is not out as long, that it really impacts the way that we engage in the world. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, as it gets a little colder and it gets darker sooner, people absolutely spend more time indoors. It's less likely that you take a light stroll to your mailbox and stop and talk with your neighbors that you probably do in the springtime or when we have longer daylight hours. So if you leave work or school and it's already dark, like you've missed the opportunity to be outside at all. And that will happen as we progress further into the fall and winter. So something like that with really low opportunities to even get sunlight exposure means we need to make that effort. Just like children, hopefully they're still getting recess at school. But what about adults? Like, do we get recess, right? It might be on a lunch break, getting outside. Now, great if you want to walk while you're outside, even better, but just standing outside or sitting outside or if you have some phone calls to make on your lunch break, get outside with some natural sunlight, because that still will have a positive influence on your circadian rhythm, because it tells your body, hey, I'm awake. And then when it's dark later, it will promote better sleep. So just making sure that we can get out there, because that lower sunlight exposure also can influence our levels of vitamin D. I mean, there's a lot more that goes into that, our age and skin color and how we convert it. But some people find they feel a lot better in those winter months supplementing with vitamin D. So, if that's something that people want to talk about, that's something that, hopefully their primary care can talk about. I can certainly I do speak with my clients about that and make recommendations on how much to take and that type of thing. Just to just knowing that we are getting way less sunlight exposure.
And are there certain foods that people can eat in order to help with their vitamin D, or is it really just supplementation if they're not able to get sunlight?
So that's also a good question. There is vitamin D in foods. Some foods are fortified with vitamin D. Other foods like wild salmon, eggs, those will have some vitamin D. But unlike other foods and nutrients, it's a lot harder to actually boost your levels just with food. Really, sunlight is going to be the main thing. And if we're not getting that, then supplements. For example, if you asked about vitamin C in the winter months, sure, some people might want to take a vitamin C, supplement, but we can also increase our citrus fruits or other vitamin C foods. And for people who want to check out food first, I really do like the Linus Pauling Institute. It's through Oregon State. It's LPI. I believe it's .edu. And you can look up any vitamin, mineral, or nutrient and learn about it, but also it will rank and show you all the different food sources to at least consider that. Because we know that certain foods, I know we're mentioning vitamin D, but certain nutrients, vitamins support our immune system, whether it's vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc. Some people, again, may want to supplement, but some may say, I need to be more aware of increasing the foods that contain those vitamins and minerals.
That's a great resource, and we can link it in the show notes too, so that folks have access to that, because just being able to add something to our diet that can help with our vitamins and minerals and nutrients and stuff can be an easy addition to the diet, rather than worrying about supplements and things like that. We were talking about when it's darker out, people tend to be outside less. And I had this image of, when it's warm out and the sun is out, we're outside, we're walking the dog, we're talking to the neighbor, we're doing things. Whereas when the winter comes, we tend to walk from the couch to the pantry. We get into bad habits, and that's, we're not really going outside and talking, we're kind of staying inside, and, probably a good time to explore what's in that pantry and how we're stocking up for the winter, right? Not putting lots of processed foods and focusing maybe more on the refrigerator and the counter than the pantry itself.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny that you mentioned the walk from the couch to the pantry, because I was thinking about, hey, why don't we find ways to be outside more, even if it's not actively running or walking? And my mind went to the fire pit, because we like fire pits and it gets us outside and we bundle up. However, my children think that you cannot have a fire pit unless you have s'mores. Right? But in fact, you can survive a fire pit without chocolate and marshmallows. So again, like there's like healthier ways to do that, whether you want to, maybe cook a protein over the fire pit, or there's different things where you can make an actual meal, sandwiches. You can use cast iron skillets or pots and do those over a fire. So there's ways to get outside and still be healthy doing it.
I know that this is probably not the food that you were thinking of, but my husband told me the other day that when he roasted a hot dog over the fire when he was camping in Maine, it was the best hot dog he had ever had. So, certainly thinking outside of the box, and maybe let's take dinner outside and surround the fire pit and have something a little different, right? It spices up the routine a little, it changes things up, gets us outside, fresh air, a little bit of sunshine maybe before the sun goes down.
Well, sure. And I want to say, if you like a s'more, enjoy a s'more. Just don't have 10 s'mores, right? But the memories that you make around the fire pit are really the most important thing, perhaps even more important than what we're eating or drinking around the fire pit.
And activities like that are going to be so helpful in boosting our mood during those winter months when we tend to just feel blah. And finding opportunities and ways to have memories and, create memories and have fun experiences. And you're right, without having our hand, in the entire box of chocolate or the whole bag of marshmallows the whole time. The graham crackers seem to get neglected sometimes. It's the chocolate and the marshmallows that people tend to binge on around the fire pit. But yeah, you're right. It's a great opportunity for memory making and impacting that overall well-being and mood.
So one additional thing, when I think of fire pits and those foods, I do think of other sweet things like hot chocolate, right? Who doesn't love a crock pot full of hot chocolate or things like that? Well, it is 2024 while we're recording, and thanks to Amazon and other online retailers, there are all kinds of lower sugar, better versions. You can make it from scratch with your own cocoa powder, and whether you like stevia or monk fruit or leaving it out, or a non-dairy milk if you're dairy free, there are better ways to do the traditional, dare I say, name a brand like Swiss Miss, or the packets that perhaps don't really even have chocolate in them. There's something in there that keeps it powdery. But yeah, I mean, there's high protein hot chocolates nowadays. There's hot chocolates with adaptogens that help with the stress response. So, a good warm beverage can still be had and actually have health benefits.
I'm imagining what our next recipe can be for the newsletter is some variations on hot chocolate, because I heard you say the homemade hot chocolate and then you said protein hot chocolate, and I was like, that might be something interesting to try. So, yeah. Always looking for new ways to have healthy alternatives to some of those comfort foods that we like to enjoy.
Sure. And, the protein hot chocolate, and I'll have to make sure we take a look, because what time's the fire pit? Chocolate still does have caffeine in it. So as a nice little segue to our next thing, being mindful of caffeine, especially with the time change, always. Like a lot of the things that when I was thinking about fall back and better sleep and making sure we get good movement, and I know we'll get to that as it gets colder, but alcohol and caffeine and just the impact that has on our sleep, that's no different than when we're not doing daylight savings or falling back. But I think what happens too often is people say like, oh, this is the weekend that we get extra sleep, an extra hour, but they overcompensate by way more than an hour on Friday or Saturday night, counting on that bonus hour. So really, we wind up being in a sleep debt because we stayed up way too late Friday or Saturday night, and then we just have that 1 hour on Sunday.
Yeah, and I've been hearing a lot of people, whether it's in my personal circles or, on the Instagram, social media channels that I follow, and with clients talking about, I'm just not sleeping as well as I used to. And I have noticed for myself, a little, self-disclosure, is that one glass of wine does not do to my body what it used to do. And so I can have one glass of wine and I end up just so restless and I can't sleep, or I sleep but I wake up, and so my body is not metabolizing alcohol the way that it used to. And so I've made, choices to just not have it because I like to sleep. And it makes me wonder, kind of a little bit off topic, but for those folks who are in their 40s and into their 50s who are kind of going through those hormonal changes and things like that, alcohol consumption is something to consider. And how is that impacting your sleep?
Sure. So as we age and, our hormones are fluctuating, another thing that's happening is we have lower levels of an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, which breaks down and metabolizes the alcohol. And I am in the same boat that you are. Is before maybe it was 2 or 3 glasses of wine and I didn't sleep well, and then maybe it was 2, and now it's like any. And you think, well, do I want to risk? I can still sleep, but you wake up and you think, yeah, that just wasn't great. So it's a real thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was so weird the first time that I had. You may be right. It may have been 1 or 2 or 3. I don't know. But I woke up and I was like, I didn't have that much, but I just feel rotten this morning. And started paying attention to it. And so I'm glad to know there's science behind it and it's not just me getting old.
Well, and it's also the caffeine. Like in the past, maybe it was like, oh, I could have that extra cup of coffee or black tea at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Where now I feel like it's kind of a gamble, anything after noon, depending on what time I'm going to go to bed. So I've noticed that just personally in my group of friends as well, like our threshold for a lot of those things has changed drastically just in the past, couple years.
Yeah. And it also, I don't know about you and I don't know about our listeners, but when I go to work and it's dark and I'm coming home and it's dark, it really puts a dreary, I feel blah about it, and again, maybe it's because I'm getting older and it just feels different and things like that. But, those shorter days really impact our ability to do lots of things. And you mentioned, encouraging people to get outside. And here's my shameless plug for, eating outside, asking somebody to, join you on a picnic table outside or whatever it is, pop down the tailgate of your truck if you have it, something, whatever you can to be able to eat outside. And also going for a walk. Right? Because there's so many people that, they go for a run or for a walk or a bike ride or something after work. And when they get home and it's already dark, then when do we get that fresh air, sunshine exercise? So those midday, maybe it's not hour-long run where you're sweating and need a shower, but at least getting some movement can really impact things.
Well, I will say that having grown up in Buffalo, New York, it was pretty cold and we weren't an outdoor family. We just had to get outside to get where we were going, to get in the car. But after now living somewhere else where I appreciate the warmer weather and I like to be outside, I feel the same way about getting outside. But it's really important to have the right gear because that makes all the difference. So it could just be a matter of a nice pair of gloves or, the headbands that cover your ears. Maybe even a nice little windbreaker type jacket that you're like, hey, I want to get outside, but I don't want to be cold. Well, someone will say there's no such thing as bad weather. There's just bad gear. So really just being prepared for those winter months and having a backup plan. Let's face it, especially around here, some of our days get cold, but really the worst part of that is that damp, wet feeling. Doesn't mean we can't get outside, but knowing that can happen, just always having an alternate plan, whether that's walking indoors. I mean, you won't get the benefits of the sunlight, but I think too often in the winter, people were on a good walk or jog or bike routine, and then they just stop altogether. If you were biking outside and it's too wet or too dark, find a way to bike inside. Whether that's going to a fitness class or whether it's doing it at home, just know hey, if the weather doesn't work out today, what is my backup? What's plan B?
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good segue into us summarizing and really pulling in some tricks and tips for folks to make the best of this falling back time period. Before we do that, let's take a quick break to hear about our upcoming services at Hope and Healing, and we'll be right back.
Are you a yogi in Southern Maryland looking for a place to practice on Thursday mornings? Look no further than Gentle Yoga with Lori Bruce at Hope and Healing in Leonardtown. A certified yoga therapist, Lori brings over 2 decades of yoga training and teaching to her classes. Gentle Yoga with Lori is suitable for all levels. Join us in person or tune in from home, as all Thursday morning classes will be available virtually. Space is limited, so reserve your spot today at loribruceyoga.com/schedule.
So welcome back to the podcast. Tracy and I are talking about how we can make the most of daylight savings coming up in the beginning of November on the 3rd when we fall back and we gain an hour, and we want to make sure that we're not just changing the time on the clock, that we're actually making the most of that. So what tricks and tips do you have for our listeners about really overcoming any adverse effects of the time change and really being able to make the most of it?
Sure. Well, instead of looking at this as a negative, oh, here we go with those shorter, darker days, we can actually take advantage of it and focus on some of the positives. And the first tip would be get to bed at a normal time on Saturday night. So if you normally go to bed at 10, don't think, well, I'll just go to bed at 11 because I know tomorrow that'll equal out. So keep your normal routine. And don't try to make adjustments Friday and Saturday and piling up, knowing that you get that extra hour of sleep or overindulgence just because of that hour. Also, you want to have a plan for exercise, your meals. We talked about appetite, earlier in the podcast, and just having a plan. Like I said, we always should have that plan. But maybe in the winter months you decided I'm going to put together the food movement piece. that, it's maybe still just a little bit of sunlight when you get home from work. Maybe you only have 10 minutes to walk outside, but you're thinking, oh, I need to make dinner, or I need to get the kids somewhere, so I need to feed them and then do it. Well, if dinner was in the crock pot that morning, maybe you can take advantage of those 10 minutes, because 10 minutes over time will add up. So maybe just rethinking your meal plan, your prep, your schedule. I know we've done other podcasts on that, but soups and stews and chilies, this is a great time to bring those in and just have those ready. So if you're able to get outside, or it's a little bit warmer, or it's not a dreary day, that you say, you know what, I'm going to go for a walk first. And planning those regular walks, like you mentioned, at work. Perhaps if you need to, schedule it with a friend to go for a walk during your lunch break, or to eat outside together. I know we keep saying about lunch at work, but I know we have a lot of friends and neighbors and clients who maybe are staying at home with their kids, or work part-time. It's important there to schedule it, because if not, the day will get away from you as well, and you still haven't gotten outside, and the whole day, now the sun's down again. So just having a plan for that. And I'd say the last one, which was our last topic before the break, was just being aware of your alcohol and caffeine consumption and how it affects your sleep, especially during a time when our clocks are changing and sleep is the thing that takes the biggest hit. This is just a good time to review all of those, general sleep hygiene type of tips.
While you were sharing those tips, Tracy, I thought of a couple things. The one thing was, for some people, they don't it's not fun to shift their exercise routine in the winter, because they do like to bike outside or run or whatever it might be. And so the idea of doing it inside just isn't as much fun. And so I would just encourage those folks to consider a fun alternative to being indoors and still getting exercise and movement, because we are not grizzly bears and we are not supposed to hibernate for the winter. We do need to still move our bodies. And if we are moving our bodies, if we are feeding our bodies well, then we are going to, while we're also getting sunlight and fresh air, we're going to combat any of that seasonal affective disorder and those winter blues that we tend to have if we're trying really hard, being intentional about feeding, fueling, moving, and resting our body, right? Those four pillars that we talk about so often. And we did a podcast a few weeks ago about preparing for fall nutrition, and so listeners can go back if they haven't listened to it already about how to eat kind of locally, and soups and stews and chilies and things like that. And we can also link up some recipes that Tracy has shared before and things like that, because it really is a good time to eat hearty as well. I just think of when it's cold and dreary, and whether it's wet and snowy or not, but just those fun soups and stews and stuff are really good. And we shared in that podcast that we've done just a few episodes ago that it's a great way to really throw in some good nutrition, lots of vegetables and some good proteins and stuff. So all really great tips. Anything else before we sign off here, Tracy, that you've thought about?
Sure. Well, for some people, it's like, it doesn't have to be a major change. I mean, it really is, with the weather's already going to do that, and the darkness, but it is a shift in looking at it that way. And we're going to get back to more sunlight eventually. That's the beauty of having the seasons that we do here. One of the challenges that I'd like to put out to our listeners who are like, yeah, I'm not going to exercise outside. That's fine. I mean, do your weights or stretching inside, but I've always loved the challenge of a marathon in a month, whether it's walking, running. I mean, that might be that you do a mile every day for 26 days, plus a little, it's 0.2. Or maybe you're like, hey, 3 days a week, I got to get out there and walk 2 miles. But at the end of a month, or maybe you stretch it out to 2 months, or maybe it's shorter, you can say like, hey, I walked a marathon, because it's achievable. It just takes, a mile or two at a time, or maybe 10 minutes at a time. Everyone seems to track everything they do nowadays on their phone or their watch, but it's a way to have a goal and not just like, oh, I'm going outside because I should. I had a friend post somewhere, I'm aging myself. The only social media I really see much of is Facebook, I think, but she had like a 500-mile challenge. I mean, that was over, I don't know how long she's been doing it, but it was a picture of a foot. And every time she did something, she got to color in part of it. And she was so excited to just share, the end of her journey of like, wow, I colored in that last little block and I covered 500 miles. So That seems like a lot. I mean, she is someone who likes to hike and go camping, and I think she actually works at like an outdoor preschool. So she's getting a lot of steps in. But for most of us, something as simple as just being like, hey, my goal this month for the entire month is to walk a marathon. You may only walk on Saturdays. Maybe you and your kids, or you and your spouse, or you and a friend walk, 5 miles each weekend, and that's how you get to your marathon at the end of the month. But all those small little things will add up over time.
You've got my wheels turning, Tracy. As always, I come away with these podcasts with as much information for myself as I do to share with our listeners. So thank you very much. So listeners, thank you for joining us today. As always, I would love to hear your ideas. You can email me, jennifer@hopehealingtherapy.com, and you can send us a message on our DMs through Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear your ideas and how you adjust to time changes and how you kind of gear up and prepare for the winter. So thanks for listening, and hope you have a great day.